Greetings and welcome. We are in 303 Senior English A. And we are now on page 26 and following of your hymnal. We are looking at several poems from a classic anthology called the Exeter book. We've already given some introductory comments about the Exeter book, and now we're turning to the poem The Wanderer. We've got a translation by Charles W. Kennedy because this information, and let's write this down already now in our annotations, this kind of poetry, Anglo-Saxon poetry, is a production of what we will call Old English. That is to say, if we were to actually give it to you, you would be unable to make out most of the words because it is this Old English. So we read in translation. We also will identify, notice here on page 27 at 2b, notice that we will have some breaks in the middle of the line, these caesuras, that will allow us then to read this as a certain kind of poetics. Some of this, we believe, had to do with the memorization of these poems and then the recitation by the scop or the bard or the poet. Okay, that is to say, these were recited, these poems were recited. I'd like you to write down at level 1 the setup word for this poem. It is called The Wanderer, but I want you to write down the word exile. E-X-I-L-E. Exile. Because this is a poem that is going to address the feeling of dislocation. Exile. To this degree, we obviously at 3A already can jot down that there are some similarities between this title, The Wanderer, and The Seafarer, the text that we looked at just precedent. Okay? In both of these titles, we have a song about, a poem about what it means to be lonely. Not just alone, but lonely. Let's now take a look at this title. Let's point out right away the differences between the Wanderer and the Seafarer has to do with the speaker of the poem, the voice of the speaker of the poem. In the Seafarer, this was a first-person speaker. Here, we're going to have something a bit different. Let's take a look. I'm on page 27. Again, let me exhort you. Read along with me. Don't just listen to me reading it to you. Follow along and do your best job to try to follow the words and the ideas as they are presented. Page 27, The Wanderer. Oft to the wanderer, weary of exile, cometh God's pity, compassionate love. Though woefully toiling on wintry seas, with churning oar in the icy wave, homeless and helpless, he fled from fate. Thus saith the wanderer, mindful of misery, grievous disasters, and death of kin. Now let's just pause for a moment, and let's already recognize this is not going to be some poem that's going to make us jump up and down happy. No. Notice all the words already that are conveying sadness. The word misery, for example. We might want to write that word down at level 1. Misery, to be miserable, means that you are in a situation where things are not going well. The other thing let's point out right away, and this obviously is easily comparable to the Seafarer, we are dealing with people, two things, who live in a very cold climate, and they get in boats and go across the water. Now, for any of us that have ever been cold, it's one thing to be cold. It's another thing to be cold and wet. Would you agree with me? Cold and wet might be the worst imaginable cold. Here, notice already the icy wave. Not just a wave, icy wave. And to that degree, we're going to have a song or a poem about how terrible it is to be dislocated, lonely and alone, and then at the same time to be in abject human misery, especially nasty cold. Now, we're going to have this wanderer speak from the first person. Notice the quotation mark at line 8. Do you see it? Oft, by the way, means often. Let's read along. Oft when the day broke, oft at the dawning, lonely and wretched, I wailed my woe. No man is living, no comrade left to whom I dare fully unlock my heart. I have learned truly the mark of a man is keeping his counsel and locking his lips. Let him think what he will. For woe of heart withstandeth not fate, a failing spirit earneth no help. Men eager for honor bury their sorrow deep in their breast. Let's pause and make a couple of quick observations. First of all, did you notice the repetition of initial sounds, those W sounds, for example? Did you see it? Lonely and wretched, I wailed my woe. I'm working at line 9. Do you see it? Let's jot it down at 2b. This alliteration is going to happen all the way through this poem, and it's a powerful poetic rendering, right? The repetitions of the W sounds, that wh sounds, of course, play into this idea. This is going to be a poem about wretchedness, sadness. Things are not going well at all. Secondly, notice the observation made here that when things are going bad, the better thing to do is to just buck up and take it. No whiners. I would write at level 1 here. No whiners. In other words, he says it's better to not whine when you are in a situation from which you cannot get out of. In exile, it's better not to whine. Of course, though, let's point out a bit of irony at 2b. Notice this is a poem that is, of course, about being wretched. You could make the argument this poem is a form of poetic whining. That is to say, things are going really bad for me, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to cry. I'm just going to accept that this is the way that it is. Back to page 27. Line 18. So have I also often in wretchedness, notice the number of times that word is used, fettered my feelings, far from my kin, homeless and hapless since days of old, when the dark earth covered my dear Lord's face, and I sailed away with sorrowful heart over wintry seas, seeking a gold Lord. If far or near, lived one to befriend me with gift in the mead hall and comfort for grief. In other words, he lost his last king, and so he says, I had to go out looking for another king with whom I could identify. Maybe I could live in his mead hall. Maybe I could fight for him. We get the sense, by the way, let's go ahead and put this in our notes, that these Anglo-Saxon warriors were almost like sometimes what we think of as almost like mercenary fighters. In other words, they would fight for a given lord until maybe they lost that lord or that situation, and then they would go and travel and fight somewhere else. They were almost like traveling warriors, traveling bandits of a kind, right? And to that degree, they had learned how to fight, and then they could basically go and fight for anyone who would take care of them. Let's continue. I'm on page 27, line 26. Who bears it, knows what a bitter companion, shoulder to shoulder sorrow could be, when friends are no more. His fortune is exile, not gifts of fine gold. A heart that is frozen, earth's winsomeness dead. Let's pause for a moment and make the observation at 2b. We obviously clearly have a literal reading of this poem and a metaphoric reading of this poem. Let's write that down. The literal reading of this poem is, he says, I'm out on the sea all by myself. A metaphoric reading of this poem is, life sometimes feels like being out on the sea all alone. Exile, wretchedness. Did you notice it? Without any friends. The status here of loneliness and exile is born of this loss of friends. Having no one, no companion, no shoulder companion. Right? Now, of course, in the battle, you had to have somebody who stood either next to your shoulder or behind your back. That is to say, that's that phrase. Some of you maybe are wondering, where'd that phrase come from? A friend is somebody who has your back. To have your back means they protect you in warfare. And notice he says here, everything is dead. Everything is gone. I don't have any friends. I'm completely alone and abject. Notice line 30. And he dreams of the hallman, the dealing of treasure, the days of his youth, when his Lord bade welcome to wassail and feast. But gone is that gladness, and never again shall come the loved counsel of comrade and king. It's very possible, let's write this down at level 1, that the speaker of this poem has gone through a battle where his Lord and everyone, all of his friends, maybe were exterminated or killed. And so now here he is, all alone. Also, let's point out, we are listening to an old man now talk. Youth is gone. Youth is gone. You could make the argument, and we'll certainly make it in senior English this year, that a lot of the titles that we read are written to young people, teaching and reminding them that you're only young for a short period of time. If you don't believe that, go home, if you happen to live in a house where you are cursed with photographs of yourself on walls from your elementary years, and take a look at your third grade picture of yourself. If you live in a house where there's a third grade picture of yourself, look at that picture and realize that is you, but that is not you. Question: if you age and change that much from third grade to now, what will you look like when you're 50? Ooh. Of course, let's be fair. As a senior, you are just a couple of years from 20, which puts you halfway to 40. Wow. So these poems are a reminder that someday you have to grow old. The flip side of that argument is, these are poems that are going to help us recognize when we're young that old people have challenges that young people don't understand, and that young people should respect and understand and appreciate. For example, what's it like to be a warrior when you're young, but now that you've gotten older, nobody really wants you anymore? What's it like, for example, to have worked all your life, and then all of a sudden, at a certain age, you have to retire, and they tell you, we don't want you to work anymore. Then what do? Where do you find your sense of value? This is a difficult question. You may feel, at that moment, kind of in exile. Let's keep going. Line 35. Even in slumber, sleep, his sorrow assaileth. And dreaming he claspeth his dear Lord again, head on knee, hand on knee, loyalty laying, pledging his liege as in days long past. Then from his slumber he starts, lonely hearted, beholding grey stretches of tossing sea. Let's just point out for a second. He says, even when I sleep, I have bad dreams. I have wretched dreams. I remember the way it once was, and it's not that way anymore. In other words, even when I should be resting in my sleep, I'm not resting. Some of us will maybe jump down to 3B really quickly and write about a time in our life when we couldn't sleep very well, and how hard that is, what we call sleep deprivation, right? To be deprived of sleep is a terrible thing. Notice he says that in the morning when he wakes up, what does he see? Seabirds bathing, last line on page 27, with wings outspread, top of page 28, while hailstorms darken and driving snow, bitter than is the bane of his wretchedness, the longing for loved one, his grief is renewed. Imagine him for a moment, sleeping in his boat, and then he wakes up in the early morning and he looks out across the horizon and he sees a gray clouds coming his way, and he knows, it's going to be another wretched day of rain on the cold sea, and I'm all alone. And in my dreams, I was trying to remember what it was like when I was young and I was a warrior, and things were so much better than they are now. I'm on page 28, line 45 and following. The forms of his kinsmen take shape in the silence. In rapture he greets them. In gladness he scans old comrades remembered. But they melt into air with no word of greeting to gladden his heart. Let's just point out for a moment, this is amazing poetry that's very old poetry. He says, I have these dreams where I see my old pals, and all of a sudden I wake up as I'm reaching to grab and hug them, and then they just kind of melt away into the thin air. They melt away. Now, several of these kinds of images will become really important images down the line. The idea of reaching out, you can write down really quickly at 3A. Do you have a movie that comes to mind about a person who looks to try to embrace what is a ghost or something that they see, and the minute they think they've hugged it, it's not there, and then they go, and they're kind of really sad by that? Let's keep going. Then again surges his sorrow upon him, and grimly he spurs his weary soul once more to the toil of the tossing sea. Let's just pause for a moment and point out at level 1 here, when things get bad, the warrior keeps going. I'd write that down. It's an important message at 2A. When things get bad, the warrior keeps going. He does not give up. Even though he's in tremendous pain, he does not give up. Line 53. No wonder, therefore, in all the world, if a shadow darkens upon my spirit when I reflect on the fates of men, how one by one proud warriors vanish from the halls that knew them, and day by day all this earth ages and droops into death. I've had seniors that point out the poignancy of these lines. When we were freshmen, things were so different. There was such tremendous energy and excitement coming out of, for example, 8th grade. It's going to be so awesome to be in high school and to be able to go anywhere I want for lunch. By the time they're seniors, high school, boring. Everything passed. All the excitement, boring. Now they look around and say, I have to start thinking about what I do after I graduate. For 4 years, I was able to always kind of know what I was going to do in the August, September of my fall. And now all of a sudden, as a senior, I realize this will be my last September in high school. And then it's over. And again, going back to these lines, the earth ages. He says, and then droops into death. That is to say, what is it like to be an old person who recognizes soon I may have to die because I'm getting older? What is that like? What is that like? Or, as I will say a number of times to you as seniors, think of it this way. You are very excited about the idea of graduation. We walk the track, the balloons go up, the mascara runs, yay! We rarely ask this question, what is it like to be the parent, to be the grandparent who watches you walk across the track? In a moment, that parent or grandparent can picture you at the moment of your birth, that little tiny baby, and now grown up. As you are aging, they are aging, which means they're getting older and closer to death. Well, that's kind of depressing. Yeah. Notice, now we're going to get some more information. No man may know wisdom till many a winter has been his portion. I would write that line down. No man may know wisdom till many a winter has been his portion. In other words, you gotta live a while before you can know much of anything. Wisdom. Now let's point out, wisdom is different from knowledge. Knowledge is the stuff you know. Wisdom is how you use the stuff you know. When we are young, we have a tendency to think we know it all. But as we get older, we realize, you know what? There's some stuff that I understand now I didn't know before. I've had seniors, for example, that say, I wish, Mr. McGee, that you could go back in a time machine and you could talk to me when I was a freshman. And you could say to me, when you're a senior, the world's going to look a lot different. So it makes sense to use your time. Enjoy the experience of high school because it's going to be gone. And they'll say to me, I wish you could have gone back and told me, but the observation that I will make is, you wouldn't have heard it. As a freshman, you're too young and stupid to hear what anybody has to say. I got no interest for what you're telling me. But by the time you're a senior 4 years later, it's a whole different project, isn't it? We gain wisdom, but it only happens over time. And to that degree, let's write this down at 2A. We should never be ashamed of our mistakes. We should never be ashamed of our screw-ups. We should never be ashamed of our shortcomings. We will learn from our mistakes, and through those mistakes, we gain wisdom. We gain wisdom. As you get older, remember that as you talk with younger people. And you'll try to say to them, you need to listen to what I'm telling you. You need to be smarter about what I'm telling you. I've been there, I know it. Some of you will say, dude, that sounds exactly like my parents. Exactly. The problem, of course, is that when we're young, we're too stupid to actually usually hear what anybody older than us has to say. And then we start to gain that wisdom over time, don't we? Notice the observation here. Again, no man may know wisdom till many a winter has been his portion. Line 59, I'm on page 28. A wise man is patient, not swift to anger, nor hasty of speech, neither too weak, nor too reckless in war, neither fearful nor vain, nor too wistful of wealth, nor too eager in vow, ere we know the event. A brave man must bide when he speaketh his boast, until he knows surely the goal of his spirit. Let's just pause for a moment and point out, if you want, as young readers, if you want a nice little list of some things that you can listen to and gain wisdom by, here it is. Let's just list a few of these at level 1 really quickly. Notice he says, first of all, you got to learn to be patient. For a 3A observation, remember the final stanza of Longfellow's Psalm of Life, a poem that we've addressed before. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. In other words, the stuff you want to happen in your life can only happen with patience. Why is this hard when we're young? Because we want everything right now. I want it to happen right now. And notice the observation here is, you got to learn to be patient. Things will only come to you over time. Look at the next one. He says, don't be swift to anger. That is to say, don't let people upset you too easily, too quickly. Some of us will jot down at 3B, this is my problem. My problem has always been, the minute somebody says something to me, I blow up. The minute I get upset, I always feel like I have to say something. I got to make it right and make it right now. And I go straight to Mach 3 with my anger, and looking back over my shoulder at my life, I realize I destroyed relationships and I hurt myself because I was so quick to get angry. Why so quick to get angry? Because we lack patience. See how these start to tie together? Look at the next